Just before midnight, the security camera above the entrance of Oak Ridge Medical Clinic captured a moment that would replay across the entire staff for weeks afterward. A 350-pound giant bursting through the glass doors, rage in his eyes, knocking a security guard clear across the waiting room, only to be stopped seconds later by the smallest and newest nurse in the building. The footage would later show something almost unbelievable. While patients scrambled for cover and seasoned staff froze in shock, a quiet rookie nurse barely over 5 feet tall calmly stepped forward to face the massive intruder alone. What happened next would leave doctors, police, and everyone watching stunned. But before we get to that moment, you need to understand how that ordinary night at Oak Ridge Medical Clinic slowly turned into something no one there would ever forget. If you enjoy tense true-style stories like this one, stay with me until the end, because the final seconds of this encounter changed the life of everyone in that clinic, especially the rookie nurse no one had taken seriously. The night shift at Oak Ridge was supposed to be uneventful. It was a modest clinic located in the industrial town of Brookdale, the kind of place where the late-night patients were usually factory workers with sprained wrists, kids with fevers, or the occasional drunk who had fallen off a bar stool. At 9:12 p.m., the waiting room held only a handful of people. A teenage boy clutching an ice pack against a swollen ankle, an elderly man coughing quietly into a handkerchief, and a young mother pacing the floor while trying to calm her restless toddler. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed with that faint electrical buzz common in older medical buildings, casting everything in a pale white glow that made healthy people look exhausted and exhausted people look half dead. Behind the intake desk, nurse supervisor Karen Holt reviewed patient charts with the kind of stern efficiency that had earned her a reputation as someone who ran the night shift like a military operation. Nothing escaped Karen's attention. Late charting, sloppy work, misplaced supplies. Especially not the new nurse who had started earlier that week. Maya Bennett, the rookie in question, stood quietly at a supply counter near the trauma bay counting boxes of gauze for the second time that evening. She had been working at Oak Ridge for only 3 shifts, and so far she had made very little impression on the rest of the staff. At 5'2" and barely 100 pounds, Maya looked younger than her 30 years, with dark hair tied neatly in a regulation bun and brand new navy scrubs that hadn't yet faded from repeated washings. Her ID badge still looked stiff and unused compared to the worn plastic tags clipped to the uniforms of the other nurses. Most people assumed she was temporary, a quiet traveler picking up shifts before moving on somewhere else, and Maya seemed perfectly comfortable letting them think that. "Bennett," Karen called from the desk without even looking up. "Bay 3 needs fresh blankets. Patient says he's freezing." Maya nodded immediately. "Yes, ma'am." She didn't argue or complain. She never did. Within seconds, she had retrieved warm blankets from the linen closet and moved down the hallway with smooth, efficient steps that suggested she had spent years working in emergency departments exactly like this one. She draped the blankets carefully over the patient, an older man struggling with pneumonia, tucking the corners around his shoulders while quietly checking the oxygen monitor above his bed. The machine beeped steadily as his oxygen saturation hovered in the mid-90s. "That should help," Maya said softly to the man's daughter, who sat beside the bed clutching a purse in both hands. "If he needs anything else, just press the call button." "Thank you," the daughter whispered, relief filling her tired eyes. Maya simply nodded and stepped back into the hallway. Competence had always been her goal. Visibility was not. She spent the next hour moving through the clinic like a ghost, checking 4 lines, restocking supply drawers, updating patient charts, never drawing attention to herself, but never making a mistake either. Dr. Victor Lang, the attending physician that night, barely acknowledged her existence as he moved between treatment rooms discussing cases with the senior nurses. A paramedic named Leo Ramirez, who had delivered several patients earlier in the shift, had tried to strike up a friendly conversation with her near the ambulance bay. Maya had answered politely, but kept the exchange brief. Friendly co-workers asked questions, and questions were the one thing Maya Bennett tried to avoid. By 10:45 p.m., the clinic had settled into the slow rhythm of a quiet night shift. One patient with chest pain had been transferred to the regional hospital for further evaluation. A construction worker had received stitches for a deep cut on his hand, and the waiting room was nearly empty. Karen Holt watched Maya from across the nurse's station with narrowed eyes. The rookie worked too smoothly, too confidently for someone supposedly new to the job. Nurses with only a few shifts of experience usually fumbled equipment or hesitated during procedures. Maya never did. Every 4 line she inserted was perfect. Every medication dose was exact. Every piece of equipment ended up precisely where it belonged afterward. Karen had been in emergency medicine for almost 30 years, and she trusted her instincts. Something about that quiet nurse didn't add up. Still, nothing about the shift suggested the chaos that was about to arrive. At 11:47 p.m., the distant sound of a car engine revving hard echoed through the parking lot outside the clinic. Few people noticed at first. Inside the building, Maya had just finished labeling a drawer in the trauma supply cart when the front doors suddenly exploded inward with a violent crash. Glass rattled. Chairs scraped across the floor. A man stepped through the shattered doorway like a storm entering the room. He was enormous, easily 6'7" and well over 350 pounds, with thick shoulders and arms that looked carved from concrete. His breathing came in heavy bursts, and his eyes scanned the clinic with a fury so raw that it seemed to radiate from him like heat. The security guard stationed near the entrance barely had time to step forward. "Sir, you need to." The giant's fist moved faster than anyone expected. The blow struck the guard square in the chest and sent him flying backward across the waiting room into a row of plastic chairs that collapsed beneath him. Patients screamed. One woman grabbed her child and ran for the exit. Staff scattered behind desks and equipment carts. But in the middle of that sudden chaos, one person did something no one else expected. Instead of running away from the giant who had just knocked out security with a single punch, the quiet rookie nurse stepped calmly into the open floor between him and the rest of the clinic, and raised her eyes to meet his. The giant's heavy footsteps echoed across the tile floor as he pushed farther into the clinic, glass crunching under his boots. Up close he looked even more intimidating. While over 6 feet tall and easily 350 pounds with thick arms and a wide chest that made the waiting room feel suddenly much smaller. The security guard he had knocked down lay groaning near the broken chairs, trying to catch his breath. Patients pressed themselves against the walls, terrified, while several nurses hid behind the reception desk. Someone whispered that the police should be called, but the tension in the room made everyone hesitate. In the center of it all stood Maya Bennett, the quiet rookie nurse who had only started a few days earlier. She didn't raise her voice or panic like the others. Instead, she faced the giant calmly, her hands resting loosely at her sides, as if she were simply speaking to a difficult patient. The man noticed her immediately. His angry eyes narrowed as he looked down at the small nurse blocking his path. "Move," he growled, his voice deep and threatening. Behind the counter, Karen Holt leaned forward anxiously. "Bennett, step back," she whispered urgently. But Maya didn't move. She tilted her head slightly, studying the man the way a doctor studies a patient. "Your breathing is too fast," she said quietly. The giant blinked, clearly caught off guard by the unexpected comment. "What?" "Your pulse is racing," Maya continued calmly. "You're pushing your body too hard." A few staff members exchanged stunned looks. Was she seriously trying to calm down the man who had just knocked out security? The giant's face hardened again. "I said move," he barked, stepping forward. But instead of retreating, Maya stepped closer. Now only a few feet separated them. "You're looking for someone," she said steadily. "Who?" The man hesitated for a moment before answering. "Doctor." Maya nodded slightly. "Dr. Lang." At the mention of his name, Dr. Victor Lang stiffened behind the counter where he had been trying to stay hidden. The giant immediately turned toward the desk area, spotting movement behind it. His body shifted as he moved to push past Maya. That was when everything happened at once. As the man reached out to shove her aside, Maya moved with surprising speed. She grabbed his wrist and turned sharply, guiding his momentum instead of resisting it. The motion was quick and precise, so fast most people didn't understand what had happened until the giant suddenly lost his balance. A second later, the enormous man crashed onto the tile floor with a thunderous thud that shook the chairs nearby. Gasps filled the waiting room. Maya dropped down with him, twisting his arm behind his back in a controlled hold that stopped him from getting up. The giant tried to push himself off the ground, but Maya calmly shifted her weight, tightening the hold just enough to keep him pinned. He grunted in pain and froze. The entire clinic stared in disbelief. Moments ago, this man had knocked out a trained security guard with a single punch. Now he lay helpless on the floor with the rookie nurse holding him down. Maya looked up at the stunned staff. "Could someone call the police now?" she asked politely. As if on cue, the distant sound of approaching sirens began to echo through the night. For a few long seconds after the giant hit the floor, the clinic remained completely silent. The only sounds were the man's heavy breathing and the faint wail of sirens growing louder outside. Maya Bennett kept her grip steady, one knee pressed against the man's shoulder while his arms stayed locked safely behind his back. Despite his massive size, he couldn't move without hurting himself, and it was obvious he had realized that. Around the room, nurses slowly stepped out from behind the desk, still trying to process what they had just seen. Karen Holtz stared at Maya in disbelief. The quiet rookie who had spent the night stocking gauze and delivering blankets had just taken down a 350-pound attacker with a move so fast most of them barely saw it happen. Even Dr. Victor Lang looked stunned as he cautiously stood up from behind the counter. Is he secure?" he asked nervously. Maya gave a small nod without looking up. "He won't be getting up anytime soon," she replied calmly. The giant attempted one small movement, testing the hold, but Maya adjusted her position slightly, and he immediately stopped struggling with a frustrated grunt. Moments later, flashing red and blue lights filled the broken glass doorway as two police officers rushed into the clinic. They stopped briefly when they saw the scene in front of them. The enormous man pinned to the floor by a nurse half his size. One officer raised his eyebrows in surprise. Looks like you already handled things," he said. Maya finally eased her grip just enough for the officers to take control, smoothly handing the man over as they placed him in handcuffs. As the police lifted the giant to his feet and escorted him outside, the tension in the clinic finally broke. Staff members began talking all at once, some laughing in disbelief, others checking on the injured security guard. Karen walked over to Maya, still shaking her head. "Bennett," she said slowly, "you mind explaining how a rookie nurse just dropped a guy that size?" Maya adjusted her scrubs and picked up the clipboard that had fallen during the struggle. For a moment, she looked almost embarrassed by all the attention. "Before nursing school," she said quietly, "I spent 8 years working hospital security and a little time training in defensive control techniques." Karen blinked. "You might have mentioned that on your first day." Maya gave a small shrug and glanced toward the next patient room where a call light had just blinked on. "Didn't seem important," she said. Then, as if nothing unusual had happened, the rookie nurse calmly walked down the hallway to continue her shift, leaving the rest of the clinic staring after her. Realizing the quiet new nurse they had underestimated might just be the toughest person in the entire building.